Welcome once again, my fellow manipulators of digital fate. I'm Richie, this is Capricorn, and we are back at it with spoiler season for Magic the Gathering's Avatar: The Last Airbender expansion. This is day 2? Day 3? One of those. I'm losing track. It's just always spoiler season around here, it seems. I'm definitely suffering from product fatigue. That being said, there's still a ton of cool cards that were spoiled for this video that we're going to go over really quick. Before we do, please give this video a like. It helps me get it out to more people. It helps the channel grow. All that stuff really makes a huge difference. So thank you to you guys that do it. Also, if you're new here, make sure you subscribe so you never miss any content. Tons of spoiler videos on the way, some really cool deck tech ideas, and early access for Avatar: The Last Airbender is happening in just a couple weeks on Wednesday, I believe November 12th, if I'm not mistaken. And I'll be doing a crazy marathon stream with all sorts of crazy deck ideas. So if you have ideas about decks, definitely post them in the comments and we'll get to those. But let's dive in. So first off, we've got Compassionate Healer, a 2/2 human cleric ally for 1 white and 1. Whenever this creature becomes tapped, you gain a life and scry 1. Makes it a little bit better for vehicles and things like that. Nothing super amazing to write home about, although it is worth pointing out the fact that this is an ally, and allies are like a super tribe in this set, so that actually matters a little bit more than it otherwise would, and it's going to be able to pick up all of those ally tribal benefits, which will be very helpful in Limited. Next up, we've got Forecasting Fortune Teller, a 1/3 human advisor ally for 1 blue and 1. When this creature enters, you create a clue token. Honestly, not too bad when it comes to filler for Limited. Getting a nice 1/3 body that slows down aggro and eventually replaces itself with another card, giving you that clue token in the interim, is actually pretty decent at common. You can easily grab one of these later on in a pack when there aren't anything, there aren't any better picks to grab, and not feel bad about having it be like your 22nd, 23rd card in your deck to round it out. Next up, we've got Fire Nation Cadets, a 1/2 human soldier for 1 red mana. This creature has Firebending 2 as long as there's a lesson card in your graveyard. You can also pay 2 mana just to give it +1/+0 until end of turn. Activated abilities like this are way better than they look on the surface because just having the threat of activation can sometimes make the card really powerful. If you are just going to use your mana in your second main phase and you don't have anything that you have to absolutely play during your first main phase, you can hold up 2 mana or 3 mana and swing in with this. If you're holding up 4 mana and your opponent has, a 3/3, they're going to second guess blocking your Fire Nation Cadets because you could pump it up and trade with their 3/3 that cost them a lot more mana to play than this thing did, and really get some card advantage out of the deal. So just having an activated ability like this, I think just by default makes it a little bit better than people might realize at first. But also potentially picking up Firebending a little bit later, being able to swing, get that mana, swing as a 2/2 potentially at the very least as the floor, but then if you have even better things to put that mana into, it only goes up from there. Can honestly be pretty good. It is worth pointing out this is not an ally, and that's going to matter big time with this card, but I still think it could be a pretty good card in Limited, especially if you have more things to spend the mana on, especially if you're just in the lesson deck and you're like always going to have a bunch of lessons in your graveyard because you have so many in your deck. It's really easy to turn this on. It's also really easy to have a chance at having more instants in your hand to utilize the mana that you get from the Firebending in a lesson deck because at least half of the lessons are instants. Next up, we've got Deadly Precision, a sorcery for 1 black mana, destroys target creature, but of course there is a caveat. As an additional cost to cast this spell, you have to pay 4 or sacrifice an artifact or creature. I think this is like the best version of a card like this we've seen. Sure, it's sorcery speed, but the fact that you have the ability to either sacrifice an artifact or a creature or just pay a total of 5 mana, that is insane versatility. We've had cards in the past that have allowed us to pay the extra mana or sacrifice a creature. I don't know if we've been able to sacrifice one of 2 different permanent types or pay the mana. I don't know that all 3 of those alternate costs have ever been on the same card before, even though we've had different mixes of 2 of these three things. I think that might make this the best version of a card like this that we've gotten so far, which is kind of exciting. The one caveat to that is there may be one or two versions of this kind of card from past sets that are instant speed. I don't remember off the top of my head if that's the case, but of course that would keep this from being strictly better than some of those cards. I still think it's going to end up being a really, really good card. Definitely jam it in limited. Removal is just a premium in limited, but I even think this might have a chance to make the cut in some standard decks, especially if it's like a sacrifice oriented deck like Aristocrats. Next up, we've got Origin of Metal Bending, an instant lesson for 1 green and 1, and you choose one. Either destroy an artifact or enchantment, or put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control, and it gains indestructible until end of turn. I love seeing these pieces of removal for artifacts or enchantments that have an alternate use, so that you can just put them in your main deck in limited and not feel bad about it, because if they don't have an artifact or enchantment to destroy, you have something you can use it for at least. You can, you know, help protect your dude in combat from dying, give him a +1/+1 counter, respond to your opponent's removal, keep your guy alive. No matter what you do with the indestructible, you're going to have that +1/+1 counter that's going to be lasting power and toughness value for the rest of the game. So having the ability to pivot and use the card that way, or use it as a disenchant, I think is really powerful. And the fact that it's a lesson is just icing on the cake, because there are cards that have synergies that will interact specifically with lessons that make this go up in value just a little bit. We've already seen some in this video. And obviously, if they end up printing any Learn cards in the new Strixhaven set that comes in 2026, this card gets way, way better, because you can tuck it away in your sideboard and just find it incidentally with a Learn card. I have a feeling that's not going to happen, because I feel like these lessons are more powerful than the original lessons that we got in the first Strixhaven set. And I feel like if you could find these with Learn spells, it's going to be pretty wild. And, you know, you're definitely going to be able to do that in older formats as of right now, but those older formats are power crept to hell, so I think it'll still kind of balance out. It'll be crazy to see if Strixhaven brings Learn back, though. That would just be insane. I can't wait to find out. But next up, we've got Lost Days, another instant lesson for 1 blue and 4. The owner of target creature or enchantment puts it into their library second from the top or on the bottom, and you create a clue token. I actually think this is pretty decent for removal when it comes to the fact that it's a blue card and it's a common. Blue removal is usually the most difficult and the kind of crappiest out of the bunch. And obviously common removal is going to be a lot worse than, you know, higher rarities. So this thing's still being instant speed, getting rid of something completely, not even putting it in their graveyard where they can potentially get it back later, but just literally putting it into their deck so it's no matter what gone. And then also getting card advantage, right? Also replacing itself like a cantrip. All of that stuff matters, and it's at instant speed, which really matters too. And it's a lesson, which plays into lesson synergies. So I think most people are going to see this and see that it's 5 mana and just think it's way too much, it's way too expensive, and it's just not good enough. But I actually think in limited, this card's going to be fairly good. It only takes 1 blue mana, it's easy to splash, there's just so much upside to this card. I'm surprised we're actually getting common removal in blue of this caliber, to be completely honest. And I'm pretty glad this card exists. But next up, we've got Boomy Bash, a sorcery for 1 red and 3, and you choose one. It deals damage equal to the number of lands you control to target creature, or you destroy a land creature or non-basic land. Pretty interesting card that can pivot. Just being able to basically Stone Rain your opponent, destroy their non-basic land without letting them fetch a land to replace it, makes this way more powerful than it appears on the surface. It's been quite a while since we've gotten legitimate land destruction that does not replace the land with a basic land that they can fetch from their deck. And that's pretty wild. We've already seen one card as well in this set. I forget the name of it, but it makes it so your opponent can't really effectively search their library. So if you play that with some of the lands that can destroy other lands that let them search for a basic, but then they get, you know, punished for trying to search their deck or whatever. You could pair stuff like that with this and maybe have the start to an actual land destruction deck, which is kind of interesting to think about. Obviously, if you have ways of doubling your spells, getting 2 of these at the same time and taking out 2 lands could be pretty wild as well. And then if they happen to turn their land into a creature, and I have a feeling that Earthbending is going to be really powerful after this set, you could potentially hit a land that's not even a non-basic, which is pretty cool too. All of that on a card that, at the very least, you're going to be able to, like, kill one of their really good creatures. When you play this for 4, if you have even just, let's assume, the 4 lands out that you would need to cast this thing, that's still doing 4 damage to any creature you want, and it only scales up from there. So I actually think this is pretty good removal for limited. A little bit expensive, but still really great for limited, especially when you can pick it up at the common slot, maybe a little bit later in a pack. And the fact that it can pivot and deal with land creatures or non-basic lands, the fact that it's potentially even usable in standard because of its land destruction capabilities is kind of exciting. I don't know if that deck's just a meme or if it's going to be real, but I am excited to find out. Next up, we've got Octopus Form, an instant lesson for 1 blue mana. Target creature you control gets +1/+1 and hexproof until end of turn, and you untap it. This is really good for a lesson. I would say that a spell of this caliber is normally what you should expect even without being a lesson. Being able to give something +1/+1, untap it, sort of catch your opponent with their pants down in the middle of combat, maybe blow them out, kill their thing that they didn't expect, don't let it through, that sort of thing, but also being able to pivot and protect your creature from removal because of hexproof. There's a lot that this card can do, and the fact that it's also a lesson and picks up those lesson synergies and potentially has access to more lesson synergies when Strixhaven comes around, all of that's pretty exciting for just a 1-drop. So I'm pretty stoked on this card. Next up, we've got Earth Rumble Wrestlers, which I'm pretty sure is the last common of this video. A 3/4 human warrior performer with reach for 4 mana in the colors of Gruul, and that is a hybrid mana, so you don't have to be in both green and red, just one or the other. This creature gets +1/+0 and has trample as long as you control a land creature or a land entered the battlefield under your control this turn. That's pretty good. I kind of like this guy. He's not an ally, which is sort of a bummer. But 4 mana, which is easily splashable in almost any deck because of the very low color requirements of that one singular hybrid mana, is pretty decent for a card that most of the time is going to be a 4/4 trample reach for 4. That feels really, really good to me in limited. You either trigger that by landfall, or you just have a land creature. The Earthbending deck's going to love this guy, but even outside of the Earthbending deck, you know, having a 3/4 reach that you can just landfall, turn into a 4/4 trampler, seems pretty decent. So I actually think this guy's really cool. But next up, we have our first uncommon of the day. This is White Lotus Hideout, a land that taps for a colorless mana, or you can pay 1 mana and tap it to add a mana of any color. But the real reason you're going to want to be playing this is you can also tap it for a mana of any color if you spend that mana only to cast a lesson or shrine spell. And to me, this is an immediate red flag, it makes it completely obvious immediately that lessons and shrines are both very relevant archetypes in limited. And I knew for sure lessons would be, just because of the sheer number of cards that we've seen caring about lessons so far, but I was a little on the fence whether shrines were actually meant to be an archetype you try to build into in limited in draft, or if it was some cheeky new thing they were trying to make exist in standard. And whether or not they're trying to make it exist in standard, that's still up for debate, but this makes it seem very obvious to me that they're trying to make shrines an archetype in limited for sure. So I'm excited to see where else they're going with that. I'm really hoping we're going to get 2 cycles at least of shrines in this set and not just the 1 uncommon cycle. So fingers crossed for that. I'm really excited to see where it goes. But next up, we've got Fancy Footwork, an instant lesson for 1 white and 2. Untap 1 or 2 target creatures. They each get +2/+2 until end of turn. This is a really nice combat trick. It's not the most amazing card ever. You have to have the right board situation in order to truly take advantage of this to its absolute most. That being said, even if you just swing in with a bunch of unblocked guys and you're able to get in for an extra 4 damage because of a card like this, that's not so bad either, and it picks up all of the extra value being a lesson allows you to pick up, so I think it's fine. Next up, we've got Tundra Tank. I actually really like this card. A 4/4 artifact vehicle with Firebending 1 for 1 black and 2. It crews for only 1, which is kind of awesome considering it's a 4/4 for 3 and Firebends. And when this vehicle enters, target creature you control gains indestructible until end of turn, which is just the icing on the cake. You jam it down, the turn it comes into play, sure, it can't attack itself, but it's going to make your best creature not have to worry about getting killed in combat, just be able to swing in, get in for a bunch of damage, make your opponent have a really bad day. And then in subsequent turns, you're crewing this with your worst dude, maybe a token dude, swinging in for 4, generating a little bit of extra mana every time. All in all, the value that a card like this offers, I think is pretty good. I'm excited to see just how good this ends up being in Limited, because I have a feeling the answer is very. But next up, we've got Momo Playful Pet, a 1/1 legendary lemur bat ally for just 1 white mana. He's got flying, he's got vigilance, and when he leaves the battlefield, you get to choose one. You either create a food token, or put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control, or scry 2. I love everything about this guy. He comes down early and he's just hitting in for a point of damage every single turn in Limited, and then eventually he's able to just block, even if he's just chump blocking a big flyer. That's still extra value, and when he does, you get even more value when he dies. Everything about that I love, and you don't have to worry about making hard decisions about keeping this guy back to block on a key turn because of the vigilance. You just keep swinging in forever as long as they don't have flyers, and then eventually still block and not have to worry about making the right decision to hold them back as a blocker to set yourself up for that block, which is awesome. We've also seen a bunch of +1/+1 counter synergies in this set already, so having something like this out super early as just like an aerial platform to just dump counters on, dump equipment on, dump auras on, that sort of thing, is pretty valuable. And the fact that one of the things he can give you when he dies is a +1/+1 counter makes me think that this guy really wants to be in the +1/+1 counters matters style deck, maybe with earthbending, because he's a really good target to dump counters on, and when he dies he gets to dump a counter on something else. Everything about that seems awesome. I love this dude. But next up, we've got True Ancestry, a sorcery lesson for 1 green and 1. Return up to 1 target permanent card from your graveyard to your hand, and create a clue token. This is actually a lot of value for an uncommon in Limited. It's just 2 mana, gets you back your best thing from your graveyard, and eventually lets you draw another card to replace itself as well. It's kind of automatic 2-for-1 card advantage, which I like. It does take you a little bit of time to get there, because you gotta pay 2 now, and then eventually pay 2 more into that clue token. But I still think this is pretty decent green card advantage. If you're playing Simic, I don't know if it'll make the cut. There might be better card draw spells, strict card draw spells in blue, but I have a feeling if you're playing green and you're not playing blue, this card might end up being pretty high on your list of cards to snag in a draft. Just pure card advantage without having to go into blue seems a little good. So yeah, I really like this guy. Next up, we've got Glider Staff, an artifact equipment for 1 white and 2. It equips for 2 mana. When it enters, you airbend up to 1 target creature, which means you exile it, and while it's exiled, its owner may cast it for 2 rather than its mana cost, and then equipped creature gets +1/+1 and flying. Honestly, not that bad. Just a 3 mana thing that airbends is kind of decent in and of itself. Reminds me a little bit of Mana War. You know, you bounce their thing and they have to replay it, except in this case, you exile their thing and they can replay it for only 2, so not quite as good as Mana War, but you get a little bit of extra silver lining value because of that, in that you can hit your own thing, recast your own thing. Maybe it's something that has an ETB trigger or something like that, that you can get extra value off airbending your own thing and replaying it. Plus you get the +1/+1 in flying that just sits on the board forever, that you can just move around to whatever creature you want to have it. So the value you get all in all out of this card, I think, is actually pretty decent. I don't think it's like super insane. It definitely gets a lot better if you're in like an airbend deck, where the more you get to airbend, the more value you can get off of a card like this. it'll be interesting to see where this card lands. But next up, we've got Invasion Submersible, a 0/0 artifact vehicle for 1 blue and 2. When this vehicle enters, you return up to one other target non-land permanent to its owner's hand. So this really is like a Mana War, except it's a vehicle. And then it has an exhaust ability where you waterbend 3, and this vehicle becomes an artifact creature, and you put 3+1/+1 counters on it. Really interesting, because even though it's a vehicle, you can't crew it and attack or block with it like you normally would with a vehicle. You have to exhaust it and waterbend 3 in order for it to become a creature at all. But no matter what, you get the bounce right away. You can return one of their things to set them back tempo-wise, or one of your things to re-trigger ETBs and stuff like that. You get that right away, and then this thing just sits there, and eventually you either tap 3 creatures, or pay 3, or some combination of the two, and now you get another 3/3 on the field. I kind of like that. It's really interesting seeing a lot of these vehicles. There are a decent number of vehicles coming in this set, and they all seem like they have really weird, interesting twists on the station mechanic that we saw in Edge of Eternities. It's like there's different ways in which these cards are trying to have the station ability without actually having the station ability, which I think is interesting. We've already seen one that puts like fire counters on itself for colorless mana. Then you have this one that water bends and turns it into a creature. Really interesting that they decided to go there. I almost wonder if in playtesting they were trying to use the station mechanic and have like vehicles that could be vehicles but also be stationed like spacecraft. And something happened in testing which made it just weird and funky, and they abandoned that and maybe transitioned all of those vehicles into these different alternate ways of turning them into creatures. That's sort of my guess, because I feel like a lot of these extra ways to turn vehicles into creatures are just too close to the station concept to be coincidence, especially with that set only being a few sets ago. So this one's pretty interesting. I'm excited to see what else comes from vehicles. But next up, we've got Fire Nation Warship, which is another vehicle. A 4/4 vehicle, to be precise, with reach for 3 colorless mana. This one does get to crew for crew 2, and when this vehicle dies, you get to create a clue token. The best part about this card is simply the fact that it's colorless. If you're desperate and you need a 23rd playable card in your deck, you should be able to just grab this, jam it into your deck, and go to town. Also, if there's any kind of vehicle archetype in Limited that gives you extra value for vehicles, buffs up your vehicles, that kind of stuff, and makes you want to go as wide as you can with vehicles, this could slot into that. I don't necessarily think that archetype exists, but we have seen a good number of vehicles, so I also wouldn't be surprised if something like that ends up existing in the Limited format as well. Either way, this is pretty interesting. 4/4, crews for 2, blocks flyers all day, eventually gives you a card to replace itself when it dies. All of that's pretty decent. But next up, we've got Foggy Swamp Spirit Keeper, a 2/4 human druid ally with lifelink for 3 mana in the colors of Dimir. And whenever you draw your second card each turn, you create a 1/1 colorless spirit creature token. With this token, can't block or be blocked by non-spirit creatures. I love everything about this card. Holding this back as a blocker against aggro just seems sick. It's got high toughness, it's got lifelink, so it's really hard for your opponent to just swing into it. But the problem is, if they don't race you down, every turn you're finding ways to draw a second card and spitting out another 1/1. And those 1/1s are essentially unblockable in a way. It's kind of like the spiritual successor to the shadow mechanic. If you guys remember that mechanic from way back in Tempest and Stronghold and Exodus, I believe was the 3rd set of that block. It kind of reminds me of the shadow mechanic, where creatures with shadow can only be blocked or block other creatures with shadow. These spirit creatures are working in a similar fashion. So most of the time they're not going to be able to block, but most of the time they're going to be unblockable as well. And if both you and your opponent happen to have these crazy weird unblockable creatures, well, at least now you can block their unblockable creatures with your unblockable creatures that can't block anything else. That's a word salad. Either way, I think this card's really cool. It's also an ally, which I really like about it. I think this might be a sleeper. I think that huge toughness with the lifelink and the ability to spit out unblockable creatures is a really, really nice 1-2 punch. I'm excited to draft this guy for sure. But next up, we have our first rare today. This is Secret Tunnel. And we have official confirmation now that caves are back in a big way. Caves as an archetype from the Lost Caverns of Ixalan expansion. The last thing I ever expected was for caves to get more support. But here we are. We're on the cusp of 2026 and we've got some cave support. This land can't be blocked. So right off the bat, it's going to be great for earthbending. If you happen to earthbend this into a big creature, it's also unblockable, which is kind of awesome. It does tap for only a colorless mana, but even if you're not able to earthbend it, you can also pay 4 mana, tap this. 2 target creatures you control that share a creature type can't be blocked this turn. So you can still dish out unblockability to some other creatures. This seems super powerful and limited, as it should, because it's a rare, so it's not going to be popping up all that often in limited. In Constructed, this makes me really wonder if the cave deck is a thing. And it makes me think that if the cave deck actually ends up being a thing in Standard, it tried so hard in Lost Caverns of Ixalan, and it was close, but it just wasn't quite there. It just was missing a little bit of support. Do we now have that extra bit of support to make cave decks matter? And if we do, I'm pretty sure it's going to be some kind of cross-pollinated synergy of like a cave deck archetype and then also earthbending, so that you can take advantage of the cave that can't be blocked if you earthbend it. I think that makes all the sense in the world. I'm excited to find out if I'm right about that. We have to try it at least, right? We have to try to make the cave deck a thing, finally, after all of this time. So I'm excited to try that. If you have ideas about what cards we should include or how we should try to make that work, let me know in the comments, because early access is right around the corner. And that brings us to our last card of the video, Zuko Conflicted, a 2/3 legendary human rogue for 2 mana in the colors of Rakdos. And at the beginning of your first main phase, you choose one that hasn't been chosen and lose 2 life. You either draw a card, put a +1/+1 counter on Zuko, add 1 red mana, or exile Zuko, return him to the battlefield under an opponent's control. This card is really, really interesting. First of all, if you run this in an aggro deck, giving him to your opponent could actually help you win a whole turn sooner than it otherwise would. Like, sure, you're giving them a creature and they're able to get the value off of these triggers once you do, but you got to remember, every time one of these triggers goes off, you also lose 2 life. So if you hand Zuko to your opponent and that first trigger is enough to kill him if he's only at 2 life, it's just an extra way to deal 2 damage to your opponent and take him out of the game before he even gets to use Zuko. But even if he does get to use Zuko, like, how much life does he have left if you're in an aggro deck by the time he takes control of Zuko? If you're not burning him down to single digits by the time this thing exchanges control, what are you doing? You're screwing up playing an aggro deck to begin with if that's the case. So handing him to your opponent and being like, you're on a 3-turn clock because you're at 6 life and he's going to do 2 damage to you every single turn, it's kind of sick. I kind of like that. Obviously, you're going to want to be careful with the order you choose some of these things to get the most value. Usually, you're going to want to sort of tilt towards putting the +1/+1 counter on Zuko first, because the more turns you get to attack with that +1/+1 counter on him, the more it matters. The longer you wait to add that counter, the less that counter matters. If it's only around for 1 combat phase, that's kind of a bummer. Drawing the card as soon as possible is also really important, but I don't think it's as important as making sure that all of your attacks have that +1/+1 counter, or at least as many as possible. And then obviously the red mana situational. If you need that red mana desperately in the middle of combat, or I guess not in the middle of combat, right? It's the beginning of your first main phase. If you really need access to the red mana specifically for something that's going to get you way ahead on the board, then definitely make the red mana. You know, feel free to pivot away from whatever you were planning on doing to get the mana you need to make bigger plays. So it'll be interesting to see what order I think people choose to do this in. But don't overlook the fact that once your opponent grabs control of this guy, he's going to be taking 2 damage every single turn. It can definitely be another way to just burn down your opponent super quick. You've already drawn a card at that point. You've already generated some extra mana. You've already got in with like a 2 mana 3/4 every turn, or at least a couple turns. Like, all of that seems nuts, man. Like, jam this guy on 2, attack as a 3/4 on 3, right? Attack as a 3/4 on 4 and draw a card. Attack as a 3/4 on 5 and make a mana. And then finally give him to your opponent and burn your opponent for 2 for 3 turns in a row. The more I think about that, the crazier I think this card is. I think he's actually going to be a really, really good card in aggro. I don't know what the Rakdos aggro deck looks like. I know I have a human aggro deck that's primarily Mardu, and this guy's human. So I'm really, really excited to try and utilize this card in that deck and just see how crazy he ends up being. I definitely think he's going to be better than a lot of people give him credit for, because they're going to be so just tunnel visioned on the fact that you're giving your opponent so much value eventually. I don't think they realize just how much value this can get you in the game early, before your opponent even gets him, before it even matters that they get to keep him for multiple turns. Like, man, all of this plus potentially 6 more life gone when they have them is just nuts. So I'm super excited to brew with this guy and to find out how good he is. I think he's awesome. But that's going to do it for today's video, guys. Thank you so much for checking it out. I do have even more spoilers on the way, and a couple deck techs, whole bunch of content coming. So if you haven't already, please subscribe. If you have, hit the like button. It helps me out so much. You have no idea how much of a difference it makes in those stupid analytics. But you guys that are hitting that like button every time, it means a lot to me, and it is making a difference. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And I'll see you on the next one. Thanks so much for checking out my channel. I'd like to give a huge shout out to all of my patrons over at Patreon. Without you guys, this channel would not be possible, so honestly, thank you from the bottom of my heart for all of your contributions. If you haven't yet, like and subscribe. The more likes we get and the quicker we get them, the bigger this channel will grow and the faster it will grow. I'd love nothing more than this channel to become something very special for you guys, but it's entirely up to you how fast that happens. Also, if you'd like more deck techs, that's somewhere over there. And if you'd like to see what else the channel's been up to lately, that's somewhere up that way. Also, subscribe, circle below, do all the things.